So at that, I'll leave it open to questions for Tim.
Precisely is Canada, do you think, standing in the way? You mentioned Canada was standing in the way. How do you see Canada standing in the way of an agreement to Copenhagen?
From what we see from outside, the position of Canada is singularly unhelpful, particularly in terms of its relationship with the Kyoto Treaty, its failure to honour its obligations there are one of the roadblocks. But it is also not engaging at the sort of level that you would expect of a developed country of this influence and this economic heft.
In what way do you mean?
In terms of, for a start, aid to the developing world, or the treaty negotiations that will deal with adaptation and carbon sequestration in the developing world. We're not seeing the sort of enthusiasm to follow the lead that Gordon Brown has thrown out, for example, about brokering that particular aspect of the treaty. We're not seeing Canada engage in a way that would honour the Bill C-311 if it goes through, so accepting binding targets from now on. So they're just some of the areas where we're not seeing that sort of leadership, I suppose, that you would expect of a country like Canada.
As far as aid to developing world, you've mentioned that. I'm sure you're well aware that Prime Minister Harper at one point described Kyoto, and I'll paraphrase, something akin to a socialist scheme to suck money out of wealthy countries into developing ones. Copenhagen seems like it's unabashed in that. Even The Guardian talking about the goal is to have rich countries pay. Why? Well, if you could explain to lay people, what does that have to do with a deal that most think is about climate change?
It is not just about climate change, it's about far more than that. But the reason that rich countries are expected to pay for adaptation in the developing world is simply they are the only ones who are capable of doing that, and there is a strong moral argument for them to do so. After all, rich countries have reaped all of the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, which has put the pollution into the atmosphere. The people in the least developed countries of the world will only suffer the consequences of that pollution. So there is a strong moral case. There is a real-world case that we are the only countries who are able to do so, and it is one of the absolute fundamental stepping stones that's required to bring us into a more sustainable world to deal with this climate issue.
To a public, though, that around the world is looking at their governments racking up massive deficits. Canada's proportional to its economy is much smaller than Britain, where people are fretting about the state of their budget. The United States, sell that to the public then.
The politicians had no difficulty selling to the public the billions of dollar bailout to the richest and most influential people on the planet, the bankers and investment bankers. We should have no problem honouring a moral obligation to help the poorest people on the planet.
On the fact that Stephen Harper is going to make an announcement today about carbon sequestration, and his government is putting roughly $1 billion into projects. What do you think of that approach?
I think that's excellent, and that is exactly the sort of leadership that's required of the Canadian government in future. I haven't seen the details of that announcement, but if it is joined with the US program, the $10 billion program announced by Steve Chu, that would be a very, very positive step forward.
Sure if it is, but you were talking about the bill that you endorsed, which is an NDP bill, and
it's not. Yes, but it was supported by 3 parties, I believe, at least the last time.
Right. Yeah, and I could be wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily going to go forward. Right now, the government seems to be suggesting it's waiting to see what Obama is going to do. And what do you make of that?
Time is very short for Canada to act in that regard, principally because we have now seen the Waxman-Markey bill pass through the House. It is now in Senate, I believe, in committee in the Senate under the, they call it the Kelly bill now, I think, there. And that, if it does pass before the Copenhagen meetings, will be enacted upon within 12 months of that time. And I'm concerned that Canada, with its very different economy and a different legislative process, hasn't mirrored that Waxman-Markey legislation. I would have thought the Canadian government would be working hard on its own legislation in a parallel process that would be passing through the House now. But as far I have seen no sign of that occurring.
What exactly is it difficult about the Kyoto Protocol? I'm a bit confused as sort of what the threat is to the Kyoto Protocol and why that's a problem.
I think the problem is that if you express scepticism about the Kyoto Protocol and decide that you're not going to honour your obligations under that, it's very hard then to turn around and play a positive role in the new negotiations.
Like, this is, you from like an outsider looking into Canada, why is it you think that we've been so bad, first of all, at reducing carbon emissions, and then secondly at sort of obstructing the international politics towards like a meaningful accord?
That's a very interesting question, and my only reflection on that is that I come from a country that for 11 years resolutely opposed the Kyoto Protocol, and Canada then was in good company. It was Australia and the United States all had a very similar position. The last couple of years have changed that now, and Australia is on board to pass its own carbon pollution reduction scheme, which will see emissions peak in about 5 years and then decline. The Waxman-Markey legislation seeks the same thing in the US, but for some reason Canada hasn't moved yet. And I'm not quite sure why that is.
Does it make sense from your point of view for Canada to follow the American path? Because the argument from the government is the economies are so intertwined that to have, it would be destructive to our economy to go in an opposite direction.
I think that's probably common sense. And there is many in the environmental movement who would say that Waxman-Markey isn't ambitious enough. I think it's probably about as good as the US can do at the moment. I'm not sure about Canada in terms of those figures. Canada may be able to be more ambitious, but if it's in the same ballpark and takes the same approach and is part of that common carbon trading scheme, then I think that'd be a positive.
Are other international observers concerned about Canada as well, or Canada's behaviour on the world scene, or is this just you?
We certainly are. The people I speak to are concerned about the Canadian position, and and really as much concerned as seeing that there's a loss of opportunity there. That if Canada did play a more constructive role, we would have it could be important. It could be important in brokering an outcome.
Summarize how you see Stephen Harper's been Prime Minister for, trying to remember, I think it's 4 years. 4 years? Five.
No,
Four.
not quite
no,
four.
4, yeah.
Okay, so just can you sum up how you see his role in terms of climate change, what he's done so far?
Well, from what I see from the outside, and I'm not as close to the internal politics here, of course, as I'd like to be, but from what I see, Stephen Harper's view is very much the view of John Howard prior to his loss of the election, and George Bush, very similar sort of view that these international negotiations are not of any particular importance, as far as I can tell, and that perhaps climate change isn't such a major problem as most of the world thinks it is.
The BBC added fuel to that fire this week. Paul Hudson and the BBC, neither of which are considered climate change skeptics, posting a piece online and on the air in Britain saying that the warmest year was 1998 and we're into a period of cooling. It's created a lot of controversy. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Look, my view of it, which I think is that of most scientists' view and is supported by the computer modelling, is that there are obviously climate cycles that work at the decadal and longer level, and there are other variables in climate, such as the El Nino effect, and that 1998 was an exceptionally hot year. And it would be very alarming to see that repeated in the near future again. But if you take the 100-year timescale that climate scientists work off, so from 1900 through to 2009, or 109-year timescale, and look at the trend, we are still in a warming trend. So that the Earth hasn't cooled, if you look at it over that context. From year to year, there's variability, but that is not what you look at when you're looking for the overall climate signal of the planet.
Is it a 30-year cycle, as he was putting forward, that will cool for the next 20 years and then start warming up again?
The modelling that I've seen suggests that we will see the warming trend resume between about 2011 and 2015. But there'll be many views on this. That's the work done by the Hadley Centre in the UK.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that American targets and Canadian targets are more or less the same. I think that's what our Minister of Environment says. And they start with a baseline in 2005 rather than 1996.
Sure, and that may well be the case, but we, in terms of honouring those targets and those commitments and getting a carbon trading scheme working, it seems to me that the Canadian economy and political system is so different that there is a substantial amount of work that needs to be done to put a carbon pollution reduction scheme in place in this country. I've been involved in Australia and at the complexity of the issue there, and these are large, complex bills with many ramifications, and with a limited time frame to operate, it would behoove Canada well, I think, to start going down the path of developing its own legislation.